Are unhealthy behaviors getting in the way of your productivity? And maybe because of that, it's impacting your personal relationships, your own self esteem, and you just want to get focused. You just want to get back on track. Well, I've helped hundreds of entrepreneurs, CEOs of $100 million companies, Olympians turned entrepreneurs, founders change themselves, shift themselves, and get back on track in their business. You may have also read some of my top trending articles for entrepreneur.com. Well, today I'm going to go through 10 of what I believe to be the top unhealthy behaviors, toxic behaviors, and for each one, give you the information and knowledge so that you can start to take action today to start getting results. All right. So, number one, which is burnout. Now, the central piece of burnout for most people is lack of emotional intelligence and connection with themselves. And so this can be more also with those who are more analytical, right? But for those who, for example, start meditating and become more connected with their bodies, then what starts to happen is that you start to be able to listen to that. Or you're in a situation, for example, late at night where your body rather says to you, okay, it's time to go to bed. You get those early signals, but then you choose to ignore that. And it gets later and it gets later. You're on your screen later. It's hard to get to sleep. You don't get deep REM sleep. So you wake up late, and then that impacts your productivity. Then we use energy drinks, and then there's just this negative spiral. So burnout is probably one of the most common. Fortunately, it's actually one of the easiest to resolve by, for example, starting to build in a consistent meditation habit, which gets you more connected with yourself. But also, what you want to start to do is put in place some simple rules to start to reset yourself. And so for you right now, and everybody's different, ask yourself, what is the number one thing which is causing my burnout? Which habit do I need to change? That could be setting a different evening routine and bedtime as an example. Whoop is a good example of a tool that you can use where it will tell you, okay, if you want to get it up at this time, based on your individual body, what time do you need to go to sleep? And so then if that alarm goes off for you to go to sleep, but you choose not to take the advice of the tool, in this case being Whoop, then it's really you just choosing that. And if that's the case and you continue with that cycle, you just have to really reevaluate whether you want to change or not, okay? Because you're already getting the signals, you're already getting the things to do. So that's burnout. Number two, and by the way, all of these kind of roll in with one another, as I've mentioned before, which is neglecting personal relationships. This for me was actually huge. And so years and years ago, I used to be so focused on making money, that transition between work and then me and my personal relationships, I just neglected being present. I was so, ingrained in what I was doing. I lost sight of what was actually really important. And a lot of that was my ego. A lot of that was actually linked to my past traumas and things like that. And so we have to understand that if we're taking that energy from work and we're bringing that into the relationship, what's going to happen over time, unless there's really good communication between partners in terms of, okay, when to work, when not to work, and your rules for actually being in a relationship, then what can start to happen is your relationship will start to erode, not just because, maybe you find it hard to transition from work to actually being with your partner and being present, but also you start to neglect your health, you start to neglect your fitness, you start to neglect other things, you start to rush more, and so you start to decline. And what that does is it drops your personal level of confidence. And then oftentimes the person that got with you originally and how you showed up as a certain person, that person isn't there anymore, right? Because you have become hyper focused on just the work side of things. It's also very important to be aware of, are you using the business as a way to avoid dealing with personal relationship issues. And that can be very common. Okay, there's a bit of friction. I struggle to communicate my needs, as an example. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to retreat to what I like the most right now, which is my work. And then that becomes a habit. And it's very, very important to become aware of that habit, because oftentimes someone else will see it in us. We don't see it for ourselves, but they will probably not mention it, because maybe in your relationship, if you have someone saying, get off the computer, get off your phone, that whole conversation creates a level of emotion within you where you maybe snap and you're not showing up as your best self. The remedy to this, again, is self-awareness, right? Understanding your own patterns, your own behaviors, and start to make small changes. For example, with your fitness, with your health, and start to set rules, within your home, within, the sacred space of where you work, right? And actually start to maybe separate some areas. And this can be particularly a lot harder if you're working from home. All right, number 3, which is perfection. So for a lot of entrepreneurs, and I, again, used to have this journey myself, what can happen, especially in the early stages of a business when you've got more imposter syndrome, everything needs to be exactly how you need it to be before you release it. And I often tell the story around producing books, right? Because a lot of entrepreneurs, what they do is they start a book, but they don't complete it. And so I ask the question, I say, well, if Oprah wanted you on a show in 3 months' time, would you get it done? And of course, they go into action. And so why would they go into action so quickly? And the answer to that is most likely they would think, well, if it's on Oprah, it's on a big TV show, as an example, right? Then I would make a load of sales. And so our perfection, a lot of the time, comes from that fear of failure and worrying that if we put it out, the world isn't going to like it. The world isn't going to support it. Well, let's be honest, all right? Not everybody is going to like what you do, all right? Not everyone is going to like videos that I create without fancy edits in it, all right? But hopefully, if you're watching this far, you understand that there's value in that. And so I'm getting this out, not being perfect of what it needs to be, but I'm just getting it done, and hopefully you're getting value from that. So the perfection also comes down once again to that emotional intelligence, which I'll dive into a little bit more later. And so one immediate thing that you can do if you really struggle with this perfection is start to make micro actions, right? Start to, for example, if you haven't put yourself out there on video for a long time, right? Just start to do a story on Instagram, as an example, versus a big long video, right? And you can start to get positive feedback rewards, because one thing that a perfectionist doesn't get, because they need to have everything perfect and so they don't get things out, is they need small rewards that build up, okay? And so you can start to take those little actions, and then those will start to build up with your confidence, okay? All right, next one, which is obsessing over the competition. Now, when the false self, the ego, is very big, okay, what we tend to do is we're always, and I did this with a particular person, right, making 100 million a month or whatever the number was. It was actually 1 million a month, but this guy was making 1 million a month, and I was always comparing myself to that person. And so I was never able to be settled and relaxed. And the reason why that was because it was all about my childhood. It was all about the competition and the bullying that I'd had. And I really needed to heal myself. And so one of the things that we have to get honest about in the entrepreneurial journey is the deep work that we need to do to look into the things in the past that are impacting us now as entrepreneurs. And those things can be bullying, can be things like sexual abuse, it can be, other events which have, maybe a parent has left. All of these things happen to so many of us, but we don't like to talk about them. But the biggest thing is that for an entrepreneur, you don't see the link between that and the reason why you obsessively uh, you know, compete mentally with people around you. Now, I think that there's healthy competition, right? But you have to be honest with yourself and say, what are the areas of my life where this is not healthy? Okay. So, challenge is a great thing, right? Competing with others is a good thing. But if there's a level of being obsessed that's unhealthy, you have to decide, do I want to be more of a conscious entrepreneur, or do I want to be driving and pushing and obsessing based upon an insecurity? And that's the difference. Are you doing something based upon your own goals and your own level of happiness and, the communal goal between you and your family? Or is it because it's like, well, that person is there and I'm not? And you have to decide on whether that's a path that you want to go down yourself. The next one, which is mental and physical health. So, in my personal journey, I had childhood trauma. And then when I was a personal trainer, I got into cocaine. And so, my addiction pattern and my cycle of unhealthy behavior was essentially smoking, drinking, alcohol, drugs. And it was all through this disconnection that I had with myself. And this also is very, very common in entrepreneurship. And so, of course, that impacts health. Of course, that impacts, other different areas. And so, if you truly want to change that and you want to change that behavior because you want to be more productive, first of all, you got to get honest, and then you have to start to retrain your brain. And at the end of this video, I will share some different resources. But if you go into the description, the super high performance community is going to help you to start retraining yourself through the conscious impact experience. I'll talk about that later. So our mental health as an entrepreneur is key, but often what we do is we don't talk about that because it's taboo. And if we don't talk about it, and if we don't get it out and we don't start to change it, it's only going to get worse, because once one thing starts, another thing starts. For example, with me, drinking to smoking to drugs to gambling, they all start to compound, and that is not going to help you be the most successful person you need to be, because in order to take action and be a high performer, we need to be clear within us, right? We don't want toxicity within our bodies and also our minds, right? We want to be clear focused as much as we can. The next one, excuse me, a nut from breakfast, if you're wondering why. The next one, which is ego-driven decisions. So let me explain the ego, all right, once again, to an extent, which is you've got the false self, and then, which is the ego, and then you've got your true self. So you and your true self, it's your heart-based decisions. The ego, the false self, that thing that wants to self-sabotage you, it's another version of you, really, for a lot of people, that's based upon an insecurity. So if you have had past traumas and situations go on, then essentially there's this energy within you that causes you to self-sabotage. And so if you're self-sabotaging and you're not in the right mental state and you're not feeling great, then what's going to happen is that the ego is going to come up with certain decisions. For example, in my case, insecurity, getting a fancy, Ferrari, and that was a way to show off. And so that was based upon insecurity. Now, what's the impact of that, right? There's a financial impact of that. I was spending $3,000-$4,000 a month to rent this thing that I hardly used. But when I did go out, it made me feel good for a moment, because I'd not healed my childhood trauma. So that's one example of how the ego and the false self makes poor decisions that can impact you long term. All right. The next one, and this is very, very common with entrepreneurs, which is poor communication. Low emotional intelligence rather leads to poor communication. So there's situations that happen, there's stress that happens for an entrepreneur, there's anxiety that happens for an entrepreneur, and then we struggle to communicate how we really feel because there's fear of us losing something, We struggle with our partner to discuss what's really happening within because maybe they're going to leave us, right? And so what happens, and in particularly, with entrepreneurs who have porn addiction, that often stems from not being willing to communicate needs or desires and fantasies with a partner. And so they go to porn to fulfill that need. Or, for example, you've been working too much. And so then there's a disconnection in the relationship. You don't know how to attune to your partner. You don't know how to connect with your partner. And then what happens is you start to stray, and affairs are very high when it comes to entrepreneurs for this reason. So how do you start to change poor communication? Being in a safe space with a coach, with a group of people where you can start to open up. What's going to happen then is you first start to express yourself, which gives you cathartic release, somatic release, releases energy. And then you need a reframe in your mind, which basically helps you to understand that if you verbalize your truth, it's not going to be a negative outcome, right? Even if, for example, something happens, by you being in your truth, it's far more important than whatever you're fearing, right? And oftentimes, even if something does happen, the emotional rupture happens for a short period of time, but what ends up happening is things start to realign and you move on in your relationship or whatever, where things are better because it's based upon truth. Entrepreneurs who have high ego, low emotional intelligence, struggle to communicate, and they have a wide amount of issues and problems in their relationships because of lack of self-expression. And it gets caught up here. All right. The next one, which is this overlying topic of emotional intelligence. So I'll do another video on this, but if you have spent most of your life disconnected, then you're not going to be in tune with yourself, as I mentioned earlier, and therefore that those signals to your body essentially are foggy. It's like you not tuning in to the radio station. When you develop your emotional intelligence by, for example, meditating, right, and doing certain exercises, right? For example, answering questions. I'll share a little bit about this later on. Then the more that you start to basically attune to yourself, connect with yourself, then what happens is you start to become a conscious leader and you start to make very powerful changes in your business that can lead to far more productivity. So a lot of entrepreneurs, they don't see the link between developing emotional intelligence and business success, but I can tell you that the number one most important thing for an entrepreneur to be happy is to develop emotional intelligence, which then has a direct impact on things like marketing. It also has an impact on sales. For example, in sales, if you have low emotional intelligence, then what will happen in the early stages of running a business is you might get a no, then you see that as rejection and you don't start selling again, maybe even for a month. And that happened to me in my early stages because I didn't have the self-awareness to understand that there was a link between my past and the reason why this rejection trigger was so strong in sales. All right. So developing your emotional intelligence, it takes time. It needs to be done in streaks with repetitive behaviors. But when you do that, you will see a direct impact on your personal relationships and also a direct impact financially, because areas of marketing, for example, you are now able to be vulnerable and honest in your content on social media, in conversations. You can attune to someone better on the call, so you're not needing so much to follow a script. Those are two perfect examples of how emotional intelligence impacts productivity, impacts business results. The next one, which is not asking for help. When the ego is high in an entrepreneur, right, and when we have fear, false evidence appearing real, we do not want to ask for help. We want to go it alone. That then leads to loneliness in entrepreneurs, and we don't get the support, the accountability, the challenge that we need which is actually going to shift us out of that because it's also shifting our energy. So what you want to do is start when you're down, be willing to ask for help, and then when you're up, help people. That's my guide, right? So try not to be so stubborn, right? When you've got a challenge, find an expert and let them guide you because they have already been through certain situations, all right? And the final one, right, which is just really summarizing this whole topic of what unhealthy behaviors lead to lack of productivity. I'm actually going to pull one from the section earlier on mental and physical health and actually bring in alcohol. And I really want to focus on alcohol because for many, it is such a crutch. It is such a big part of, typical normal events for entrepreneurs. But the biggest change, I would say, in my life, one of the biggest changes came from giving up alcohol. And the story behind this was essentially I'd done loads of work on myself. I'd meditated. I cleared the drugs. I wasn't smoking anymore. And so alcohol was really that last toxicity to go. And what happened was I went to an event one night. I got invited to an event, and my sequence of patterns was I would feel anxious about going to an event, but I would go and then I would start drinking. And so no one got to meet the real me. And so one morning in 2017, I woke up and I suddenly saw this pattern. And I was like, if people want to get to know the real Simon, then I need to stop drinking. And I never drink. I never drunk after that date. So the more, I just want to share that the more that you work on yourself and you develop your emotional intelligence, the more that you go inward, you don't need crutches as much, right? You don't need to shift your state because you're comfortable with yourself. You're happy with who you are, and you don't need other things to fit in. All right. And so in terms of productivity, you will 10x your productivity when you stop drinking. And so I'm just going to preach that to you at the end of this video, because if you've got toxins in your life, and you most likely if you've been attracted to this video, then alcohol, I would say most people watching this video are going to have alcohol in their life. And the biggest upside is going to be when you get alcohol out of your life. Now, if you want to start to train your brain and you want to start to develop your emotional intelligence and you want to start to get clarity and start to move the needle, then I've got something amazing for you. It's completely free. It's called the Conscious Impact Experience. You'll go through a presentation, a meditation that will drop you into a certain state. Then from that state, you're going to answer a certain amount of questions, get to your truth, and it's going to shift you. And then after that, you can start another 7-day, which is also free. And you'll go through that and you'll start to retrain yourself, retrain your habits so that you can be far more productive in your business. Click the link in the description to the Super High Performance community and get started on the Conscious Impact Experience. And I assure you, if unhealthy behaviors are blocking your productivity, in the next 7 days, you are going to be probably more productive than you have been in the last year. And I promise that to you because I've put so many people through this process, and it's new to the community. So depending on when you watch this video, there may be a small amount in the community, but this process, I take top CEOs through, I take founders through, I take entrepreneurs through, and it works, all right, because of the questions. But you have to be honest, and if you're willing to be honest, you'll get great transformation. This is Simon Lovell. I'll see you in another video, and if you enjoyed the video, please hit subscribe, and I'll see you soon.